Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Working for Change, Using the Power of a Personal Story. My name is Heather Kilgore. I'm a parent advocate here at PACER, and I'm also the Director of Public Policy. And I have joining me Deb Ottman, another parent advocate, who will be monitoring questions and may jump in at a few times to answer some of those questions. So let's get started. Working for Change, Using the Power of a Personal Story is going to attempt to address three different things. First is advocacy, learning what that means and why it's important. Second is an idea called systems change. We're going to learn about why changing systems is important. And third, we'll learn a powerful tool, a way to affect your personal advocacy and also systems change using your own personal story and the experiences that you've had as a parent of a child with disabilities. We're all advocates as parents when we speak up for our child's needs, but this can be especially true for families of children with disabilities. You may already have great experience speaking and working on behalf of your child. You may have been speaking with teachers or doctors or other folks, and those skills can translate into systems change or into advocating for all children or for many children in a group. So what is an advocate? You hear that word a lot, but we don't exactly know what it means sometimes. Simply, an advocate is somebody who speaks up for themselves or others in order to make things better. Think about some of the ways that you might already be advocating. Some examples are attending IEP meetings with your child's team. Maybe you have joined a school group, such as a school improvement team or advisory committee in the building. Maybe you're on a parent-teacher organization, or perhaps even on a district committee like the SEEK, the Special Education Advisory Committee, or the Curriculum Advisory Committee, or the Early Childhood Advisory Committee at the district level. Some other things that are also advocating are helping make sure your child takes challenging classes or has a challenging program and challenging goals in middle and high school. That helps them prepare for transition and post-secondary education in the workforce. Attending parent-teacher meetings to discuss your child's progress and advocating for your child one-on-one with a teacher is also another way that families of children with disabilities have already been developing their advocacy skills. So what are some of those skills that make an effective advocate? And here's kind of a list. Becoming knowledgeable is really one of the most important things that an effective advocate does. You want to learn as much as you can about the topic you're discussing, but if you don't know, don't make it up. Tell the person that you're working with, I can find the answer, do some research, and follow up with them. You can ask to be on mailing lists of advocacy and disability organizations such as PACER Center. And there's also resources online on the web, at the local library. Your friends, family, and neighbors and other parent advocates can provide you with information about policies, about laws, about other things that you need to know in order to be an effective advocate. Keep your information organized to be an effective advocate. Keep copies of important documents. Maybe have a file if you're working on something long-term so that you can take notes of who you met with and what day you met with them and what was discussed. Specifically, keep track of what kind of information what kind of information requires an action step. Keep a calendar or schedule of appointments so that if you say you're going to be somewhere, you're there. And then you can keep all of your contact information in one place. Advocates are good listeners because you need to understand the facts as others see them. We all have different perspectives. And it's important to let people finish talking about their perspective, even when we disagree, by not interrupting. Sometimes it can also be an effective tool to perform some active listening. So that means when somebody has finished speaking, you clarify the meaning of what they said. So you can speak back to them and say something like, I understood you to say, and then ask them if they agree with what you heard. That way you're clear at least on what their perspective is. We always learn by asking questions, asking for details or for an example of something if you don't understand. Effective advocates are respectful of others. Always thank people for their time. Even if it was an uncomfortable or a challenging meeting, thank them for their time and perspective. Somebody who you disagree with today, you may come to consensus on, or you may continue to disagree on one issue, but they may be an ally on another issue in the future. So you never want to leave a meeting without saying thank you and being respectful. It's important to work with others and be a team player. We not only learn from each other, but we also have different resources. So somebody who is able to write really great letters might be really uncomfortable talking in person, but you could do the talking in person and use the letters that they've written, for example. And sharing your experience is a really effective advocacy tool, and we're going to learn more about that in this website. Be willing to share your experience as a parent, because chances are if you've had that experience, somebody else has had a similar experience, can learn from it, and can perhaps change the experience for many other families through you telling your story. So I've said a couple different times here the term systems advocacy. So let's define that a little bit. What does that mean? The idea of systems advocacy is changing policies, laws, or rules, and I'll explain what the difference is between those here in a minute, that determine how services will be provided to families of children with disabilities. And so some examples can include schools. Schools are a system themselves, or the school district is another large system. Faith-based places such as churches. Doctor or other healthcare providers, hospitals are a system themselves. County social services are a system, and then also the state and federal government are systems. Possible other systems include things like health insurance companies or community centers or your city government. So each of these is a system, and it has a certain way of operating. Most of the time systems are helpful and necessary, but sometimes they may not adequately address the needs of your children and or your family. So you may see that a change is necessary. That could be a change that will help other families and children with disabilities to access the services that that system is trying to provide. So the idea when you're working as a systems change advocate is that you're not looking to only affect your child's experience, you're looking to affect the experience for all children with disabilities and their families. You could, in fact, advocate to affect thousands of children in your state or community, or maybe all children with disabilities in the U.S. So the children with disabilities today receive services that are based on the advocacy work of parents and professionals who have gone before us. And you can really add an important voice to the services for children and families today and tomorrow in the future. So here's some terms to know about systems advocacy. There's a difference between law, rules, and policy. The law, first, is a legal document which outlines the framework of what is required. So laws are passed in the state and federal legislature. Rules are documents that outline how a law will be used. These are sometimes also called regulations, and there's a little bit of a distinction between rules and regulations, but if you hear them, you can think about them the same way. Rules and regulations define how a law will be used. And those are usually written by the staff of a federal or state government agency. And then there's a policy. Policies are internal guidelines or general statements on how certain issues will be handled. Now, policy doesn't have the force and effect of law. Now, your school, for example, might have written policies for students outlining attendance policy and other issues. So those are going to include in them the state law about attendance policy and other issues, but it might have other things that are not state law that are district policies and practices.
Heather, we have a question that's come in, and I'd like to read it. Sometimes I get a request to be an advocate through an action email from other advocacy organizations that I work with, and they ask me to affect change using their framework. And I'm wondering if that is a more effective way to be an advocate for my child than telling my own personal story.
That's a great question, Deb. And we're going to speak a little bit about what we're going to learn in the second half of this webinar about telling your personal story. But it's true that often we receive action alerts from advocacy organizations, and they can be terrific. It's important if you're involved with an advocacy organization and you're receiving those action alerts to, as we said in working on effective advocacy, become knowledgeable about the topic that you're involved in. I'll never forget early in my advocacy career, I responded to an action alert and called my state legislator and asked for her support on a particular issue. And she sent me back a very nice email that said, thank you for your feedback, but I'm actually a sponsor of this legislation. So it wasn't that I did anything wrong, but it would have been more effective in that situation for me to say to her, thank you for your support of this particular issue, rather than asking for her support because she was already a supporter. So it's just important to become knowledgeable about what your advocacy organization is asking you to do. Now, it's true that it is quite effective, it can be quite effective, some of those action alerts and some of those campaigns to get out letters and emails and calls to legislators. They will be more effective when you're a constituent, when you're a member of the district or the state or local place where that official is elected from. And it will also be more effective if you already have a relationship with your legislator. So don't wait to engage in advocacy until you receive those kind of action alerts. You can kind of set a good framework for yourself if you have a relationship with policymakers. So moving on here, why do we do systems advocacy? We bring unique experience to the table. Through your own experience, you know how laws and regulations are working or maybe are not working in the real world. And policymakers need to hear those kind of things, and the state agencies or the local government employees need to hear how their system is working in the real world as well, because the laws and rules and policies that are written often have consequences that the people who wrote them couldn't think about. You can also offer your own ideas about how to make either new laws or make laws and rules work better for children and families. Again, using that real-world experience, but the idea of making something even better than it already is. You can also become a role model and kind of mentor other parents and other advocates along in the system. More parents working to change systems is a more powerful voice for children with disabilities and for all families in a local community, in a school, in the state, and even nationally. So then the question becomes, does it actually make a difference? And here are some ideas from some policymakers themselves about influencing a system. I'll just read one from a state representative. Nothing matters more to elected officials like myself than hearing real stories from real constituents. They hear quite often from a great number of a great number of people who have a specific interest or who are paid to affect change at the legislature. And hearing from real constituents with real stories about how the decisions that they're making affect the world is a powerful tool for a state representative to help make their decisions. So it does make a difference. Oftentimes we say that about 5 phone calls can help change an official's mind on a particular issue. If they receive 5 direct phone calls with personal stories that something that they're making a decision about needs to go one way or another, that can really change how a representative sees a particular issue. So who do we talk about to make things better, or who do we talk to make things better? This goes back to that idea of effective advocacy, that it's very important to be knowledgeable about the issue that you're wanting to speak about. It depends on who the decision makers are, who the key decision makers are. One example, one idea might be your local school board. So these are elected school board members, and you can contact your local district to find information on who the school board members are. So schools are going to deal with issues concerning education. And if your issue is something that is a district policy on education, then speaking to your school board might be the right strategy to take. Now, if it's a particular issue that's only in your child's school, then maybe the principal is the person to talk to there. If you're concerned about something in the city, for example, maybe you want to recommend an accessible playground in a city park, you would contact the city council or the park board members to present your case and tell your story. At the county level, where particularly in Minnesota, many services are provided, including health and human services such as Medicaid, Social Security income, things like that, and you'd like to recommend changes to any of the services offered through the county or any of the policies at the county, then you would contact your county commissioner. Government agencies at the local, state, and federal level have not only the board members, the county commissioners, the school board, the city council, but they also have employees who might be helpful. For example, if you have a concern about health insurance, you might see if your state has an insurance commissioner and the staff that work under that insurance commissioner so that you can ask questions there. They will have information about the state laws, and then you can move to the elected officials to advocate for the changes that you'd like to see. So it can be a challenge to find out who you should call or who you should be in touch with. Your PACER might be able to help if you have some concerns about who to call. And you can also do that research that I talked about earlier using the library, websites, friends, family, and other advocates that have been working on these issues before. They'll have good ideas and may even have relationships already established that you could maybe attend a meeting with an advocate who already had a relationship with that policymaker. One thing that I always like to say when I'm talking with parents who are moving into advocacy work at the systems level is to remember not to let somebody tell you no if they don't have the power to tell you yes anyways. Sometimes people say no when we're asking for a change to policy, and they might not be saying no because they disagree. They might just be saying no because it can be a big and overwhelming job. But if somebody tells you no, try not to be discouraged because they might just be trying to push you off a little bit. And they might not be the right decision maker anyways because they might not be able to even say yes. Here's a quote that we see so often in the world that is a great reminder to never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Small groups of people can make big change. And in fact, as Margaret Mead said, it's the only thing that ever does. So let's talk now a little bit about the power of a personal story and about how to develop your own personal story as an advocate for systems change. Each of you has an important story to tell, and we're just going to provide a framework for how you can organize your thoughts to be effective in telling that story. Parents have found that telling their personal story is a really good way to change systems. Once you have your story planned, you can use it in many different ways and just adapt it depending on who you're speaking with. In some ways, telling your personal story can be really easy because you've lived it. But it can also seem difficult if you're in a situation where you're uncomfortable about telling your story. So it's definitely a good idea to have your thoughts organized and do some practicing so that you don't get tripped up when it can be kind of challenging. So why do we use a personal story? This Indian proverb, it kind of summarizes that for us. Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. That's kind of the idea that we're going here. It's important that we have knowledge and that we're always honest, but that personal story is going to be something that decision makers can grab onto and can remember. So personal stories do things like they'll hold the attention of the person that you're speaking with. You know, you can present facts and figures and you can give data and give a long presentation, but what's most compelling is a personal story. It can trigger feelings of sympathy or of anger, or people can be understanding of your frustration. As I said, they're easy to remember. Oftentimes, when working with legislators, for example, they will have heard a story from their constituents and will then go and when debating on the floor, when working with their colleagues, they will share those stories again because they remember those more easily than they would the specific facts and figures that they've learned. And they can really influence others. Again, it provides an opportunity for you to develop some empathy. You can put yourself in a person's shoes when they've told you a story. So here's some tips before we get into the structure of a strong personal story. Be brief and clear. Remember that your time is limited, particularly when working on the systems change level. There are lots of different competing demands on policymakers' time. So it's important to be limited. If you ask for a meeting with a legislator, for example, they might have about 15 minutes for you. Or if you happen to be at the Capitol and meet them in the hall coming out of a committee meeting, you might have only 2 or 3 minutes. So remember that your time is limited. Choose one thing to talk about. It can be very tempting to tell one story and then that triggers another memory or this other thing happened. It's important to be strategic and choose one thing to talk about at a time. If you'd like to follow up then with that legislator with whom you've spoken, then you can maybe have an opportunity to talk about other issues if they ask for a longer meeting. But when you first reach out, choose one thing to talk about. Do your best to keep your sentences short and use words, not acronyms. Often we think that people in leadership or policy-making decisions know all the acronyms, but they may not. And it's very important that you speak in the most simple terms that you can. And so even though you might know lots of acronyms from your work advocating with your own child through IEP meetings, if we're talking about education, or you may know a great deal of acronyms about your child's disability if you're thinking about healthcare issues, for example, try and use all of the words, at least defining acronyms before you use them. So let's talk through the outline here of what a personal story is. Let's start with the beginning. Introduce yourself, introduce your child, and we can all go on for a great long time about our children, and it's tempting to want to do that. But just try and give a big idea, say your child's age, define what their disability is, again remembering not to use too many acronyms, maybe a short description. Definitely brag a little bit about your child, but just a little bit. And in the beginning of your story, definitely tell what is working. You can maybe thank your legislator for their support of an issue or something like that, but say, my child is in 9th grade and is doing wonderfully in her new high school, for example. Definitely talk about what is working at the beginning. It's great to start out on a positive note. In the middle of your personal story, here's the opportunity for you to point out maybe what isn't working or what you'd like to improve. Define that very clearly and give specific examples. So you're wanting to not just complain, but you're wanting to point out the specific policy or the specific law that is a challenge, and give an example of how that policy or law has affected your child. And then provide a solution. What do you think will help? What is your idea for how to solve that problem? Now, that might not ultimately be the only solution, but it's your idea, and then it provides your legislator with an opportunity to perhaps engage with you in conversation about other possibilities for what would help, but also just as a starting point for their thinking about making that system change. Then finally, at the end of your personal story, remember always to say thank you. Thank them for their time. Thank them for their perspective. If you were engaged in a little conversation with them, again, as we said at the beginning, even if you disagree, ask them for their support. Will they agree and try to solve the problem? Would they like to talk more about it? Do they need more information? Oftentimes, again, if you're talking with a legislator, for example, coming out of a committee hearing or in a short period of time, they might not be able to express their support right then and there. They might need more information. They might want to go and talk with their colleagues or with their staff. They might want to do a little bit of research themselves. So it's a good idea to not push too hard, at least initially, on asking for agreement, but asking them, would you like more information? Can I provide more information? Would you like to talk to more families? Would you like some data, which you can gain from an advocacy organization like PACER, for example? And then ask them if they continue to kind of push you off or say they don't need more information, they don't agree, ask them directly, are they not willing to work on solving this problem? And if they're not a supporter, then it might be a good opportunity for you to take another strategy so that you don't continue to go back and tell your personal story and set up meetings with somebody who is not willing to take the lead on solving a problem. Everybody, legislators included, have their priorities, and what you're looking at might not be the priority that they have at that time. You really can do it. This might be overwhelming. You really can do it. Just take some notes for yourself, writing down what your beginning would be, what your middle might be if you've got a specific issue right now, or maybe leave that middle part blank for right now until you do come up with a specific issue that you'd like to work on. And write down the ending. How do you say thank you, and how do you offer some additional help or additional information and support, even perhaps if the person that you're speaking with doesn't agree with you. It's a great idea to practice in front of a mirror or with a trusted family member or friend, perhaps another advocate or an experienced parent advocate who's been there and who can give you tips. Be yourself. Your story is unique. One thing that often trips parents up when going to, say, the legislature is that they feel like they need to be very polished, and that they see a lot of people walking around in suits and a lot of people who are very practiced in talking to legislators, and it can kind of seem like an exclusive club. But in fact, legislators love to hear from regular people, and it's absolutely okay to just go and be yourself and have a conversation with them. You want to be polite, of course, and you want to be respectful of their time, and there are certain things to follow, like making an appointment. They very much appreciate making an appointment, but you can be yourself. Try to remain calm and relaxed. Stay flexible. An example that I can give is going to the state legislature here and talking with one of my legislators who was called out of our meeting to go and have a quick meeting with some of his colleagues, because there was a decision to be made in a committee right away. And so though it was frustrating because I had taken my time and gone down to the legislature as a parent to talk about a specific issue, I understood that I needed to be flexible. But what I made sure that I did was, as he was running out the door, said, can I provide you with some more information? Can I follow up with you? And he invited that. He said, yes, absolutely, follow up with me. And so I then, when I got home, sent him an email thanking him for his brief time that day, telling him what I wanted to say, and also, again, offering to come down at another time. And what came out of that was that he called me back himself personally so that I could tell him my story over the phone and I didn't have to go to the legislature again. Find a supportive person to go with you if you're uncomfortable going alone. Again, sometimes it can be a challenge to navigate the halls and find out where everybody is. And somebody who's been there before, or at least somebody who's a friendly face to help you find your way through the halls, can be a great resource. And many advocacy organizations, such as PACER, offer an opportunity like a day at the Capitol to go and do things like that and learn about the process. Just breathe and go ahead and speak your truth. Your story is just as valid as anybody else's story, and it's okay to just put it out there for the policymakers to hear.
Heather, I have another question. We have a parent who writes in and says, I understand that it's important for me to be an advocate, but how do I know when I should look for the opportunities to share my story?
Boy, that's a really good question. Looking for the opportunities to share your story. You know, I guess there's a couple things. One is that knowing what's happening at a legislature or at a state agency, knowing when decisions are being made is important. Even at the city council level, for example, knowing when they're choosing where new parks are going to be laid, or knowing when a new park might be getting knowing when a park might be getting new equipment and advocating for that equipment to be accessible, for example. You'd want to know when those decisions are made. So a lot of organizations like PACER, I mean, that's part of my job, is keeping an eye out for when decisions that affect special education are being made. Advocacy organizations can really help. Taking it on yourself might be a little bit of a challenge, but if you have an issue that you are particularly concerned about, the state of Minnesota, for example, the legislature in Minnesota has a bill finder function on their website. And if parents have specific questions about how to do that, they can sure call me at another time after this webinar. And my contact information will be at the end of the presentation here. The other thing, though, I would say is, in general, it's always a good idea to have a relationship with the policymakers that affect your family and your child. It's not a bad idea to, when legislators are not in session and are back in the community, if they have a town hall or a open house kind of event, to just go and introduce yourself. And you can say something like, I'm a parent of a child with a disability. You can tell that first part of your story where you introduce yourself and your child and thank them for their support of special education, for example. And tell them that you're very interested in that issue and maybe provide them with your contact information. Then it's very possible that they can ask you for your feedback if something comes up. Because think about positioning yourself as a resource for legislators so that when they'd like information or when they'd like a story or when they would like to hear the on-the-ground, real-world constituent perspective, they think of calling you. That's definitely an important role that citizens and concerned parents of children with disabilities can play in systems change. So this kind of re-says, I think, what I just did say, who should hear your story. Definitely think about who makes the decisions in the system. Again, think about that distinction between a law and a rule. Sometimes it's true that systems change means changing the law or tweaking a law or making a law more clear. But other times, the real decision is in the rulemaking phase at the state agency, for example. That it's not that there needs to be a change of law, there just needs to be a change in the rules, the way that the law is implemented. And in fact, oftentimes, the change can be at the school district or school level policy in education, and that a change in the law isn't really necessary to impact the experience of your child or the children on whose behalf you're advocating. And always, as I said before, think about who has the power to support the changes that I want to see. Here's some other ways to share your story. If, for example, you don't want to, you're uncomfortable with the thought of finding yourself at the Capitol to share your story, you can tell your story to an advocate or to somebody who does this work and give them permission to share it. You could join a focus group or other small group. There are sometimes opportunities either through the legislature itself or through the agencies or certainly through schools to share your story in a focus group or to share your story on surveys and things like that. You can always write a letter to a publication like a newspaper using your story to make a point. And I'm sure that you have a great many other ideas for ways that you could use your personal story to make things better for your child and for all children. And here's a final quote that, again, we often see when we talk about systems change, that you can be the change that you want to see in the world. I thank you so much for your time today. If you do have questions or if you'd like to follow up on any of the things that we've discussed, you're very welcome to call me here at Pacer Center, 952-838-9000, and please visit our website. Thank you so much for your time today.